Well, welcome. The silly season has started. We're now getting into local selectmen, school committee, and other important posts. These are people who have come out and not only talked about how things should happen, but put their hat in the ring and said, we'd like to make them happen. So tonight, we'll start with a candidate for selectman, well known around Milford. Let's start with an introduction.
Well, I'm Rhodes. I'm pleased to take the opportunity to run for selectman for our community. Often I get asked, Al, why am I doing this? Why am I running for selectman? It begins in the 1980s. I grew up in high tech. High tech in the 1980s in Boston was great. Had the good fortune of working with a number of good quality, high quality firms, and had a nice career going on in there. And of course, you might know that unfortunately in 2002, my wife suffered a catastrophic injury from the automobile accident when she was rear-ended by a truck. And with that, gave up working to care for her. And
many of us have read the book.
Thank you. Yes, wrote a book so people could understand what it feels like to go through that, to help people understand that this is how life can be. And immediately, beginning in 2002, I realized for the first time Milford was my home, but Milford was a community. The people in Milford were so gracious to our family. I couldn't imagine, I couldn't even believe how generous people were to our family. And I always tell this story that Rebecca was in Middle School East and Diane Julian was her guidance counselor. And Diane said, look, as long as Rebecca is in our school, you don't need to worry about her. And wow, you know, that's a really important thing to do, you know, when you're caring for your family and trying to get everything, to know that your daughter's going to be okay.
Sure.
And all the way through schools, everybody made it clear. Nancy Angelini made it clear when she was housemaster at high school. When Becca is in our school, we'll take care of her. So many people in the community cared for our family. And with that, as Marcia began to get better and began to get on a more solid footing, I realized I had the obligation to give back, to care for our community as much as people had cared for us. And as you know, I joined the Commission on Disability and then later became the chairman of the Commission on Disability, and pleased that we were able to do some very, very good things in that role. And Al, while in that role, had a chance to get to know town operations. You know, being on the Commission on Disability brings you in contact with everybody, whether it's the planning board or the zoning board or the building commissioner's office or the town administrator's office, legal department.
Every building, every process is affected.
Is affected. And one way or another, I learned how to work with them so as to be the most effective I could on behalf of the Commission on Disability for persons who are seniors and who are disabled. And through that, as chairman, asked everyone in the community, what's the problem? What's the big problem facing the community? Over and all, I was told, we need public transportation here in Milford. And of course, you know very well, it hadn't been here in Milford for many, many years, and oftentimes it had been discussed, but decided this just wasn't the right time. Well, you know, so I began to attend selectmen's meetings about 3 years ago, and kept attending selectmen's meetings and began to understand how do decisions like this get made. Worked very hard at talking to lots of the stakeholders in this. Worked hard talking to the clergy in the community to get their input. All of the, you know, housing authority, just everyone that might have an influence on this. And of course, the finance committee spent several meetings with the Finance Committee going over the details, and that's when I learned a great deal about how the Finance Committee operates and how it thinks about things. Had 3 community open forums. You remember those where we stood up in front of 50 to 100 people and realized, well, here was a plan, but this is what people would rather do instead. And began to formulate an idea with the help of the Selectman. They brought it forth as an article last year, and it passed, and now it's running. But what I realized through it was a person who's got dedication and has the will and the time and the knowledge can really help people here in Milford. And that was the basis of why I decided to run for selectman, so I could continue that effort in other areas that are important to me.
Every show I've ever started in the political season starts and ends with the same question. Harold, I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, let me begin by saying I have a deep dedication and caring for this community, and it is heartfelt, and I think people who know me know that Milford is very important to Marcia, Rebecca, myself, and you know, I just couldn't imagine throughout our ordeal what would have happened if we were living in some other community that didn't care for us as well. I just can't even imagine that. I believe that what I want to do, the things that are important, are vitally important to the community. The first thing is, I want to bring transparency to Town Hall. Having had the chance to spend many, many days in meetings and everywhere, I realized that there are just a lot of things that go on in Town Hall that the community should be aware of. And if they were, they'd be more engaged. My perfect example that I always give is our state has an open checkbook. Milford should have an open checkbook. The state, you can look and see who's getting paid how much. We should have an open checkbook. The second one is there are topics that get discussed at selectmen's meetings with packages. But if you're at home or you're in the audience, you don't see those packages. That information should be published, should be part of the minutes. Lots of the internal reports about departmental reports should be published so people can see what government is doing for them. So the first thing, transparency. And I've never known a good organization that didn't have full transparency. The second one is, I imagined what I would like to see Milford look like in a few years. If I could just fast forward 5 years or 10 years, if we could just set ourselves up to 2025 or something, what would we want Milford to look like? Well, the very first thing, Al, I think we would say that we need to improve transportation. We've all suffered the issues of 495 going into 85, going into 109, down Route 16, Purchase Street, Dilla Street, and I could keep naming them, and all being frustrated because of the streets are just never been built or updated to take care of what has been a growing number of homes, particularly now in the Blackstone Valley. We must find a way to at least mitigate challenges in transportation. There are some short-term things we should be working on and some longer-term things that we should be working on. And this is the obligation, I believe, of the Board of Selectmen. This is their job to be looking forward and saying, look, in 5-10 years, we have got to bring a solution to this problem. I'd love to see perhaps a parking lot at Big Lots so people could get on a bus right at Big Lots, take a fast bus right down to the Franklin train station, get on the Franklin commuter train, and get downtown much more easily. Now, a lot of work to get that done, but it takes cars off, right? I've often said, I know the difficulties with fixing Mellon Street, the Mellon Street Bridge. All right, we're making some progress with Hopedale, but in a few years when it is fixed, that's a little bit better. And I also know that when Beaver Street when and if Beaver Street could become two-way at Route 109, that would help a great deal too. It's a big deal effort, but again, with the leadership, the will, the tenacity of a Board of Selectmen, I believe we could find a way to make that happen. So that's transparency and that's transportation. The next one, besides those two, we want to see, it's sort of hard to explain, but we want to see a system of working between the town and the schools working better together. School choice has been a difficult issue for the town of Milford. And, there's lots of reasons why that's going on. And, there are lots of good people thinking about solutions to it. But one solution I'd say is the town and the schools need to be working better together to making Milford more appealable, okay? That, coming up in high tech, working for businesses, you don't like to see silo organizations, engineering here, marketing there. You like to see them working together. So while this is the area of the school committee, it is something important to the whole town because the budget that goes along with school choice out affects all the services that can be given to all the community. So some cooperative effort between the two, I think, is a reasonable thing to do. Now, how are we going to do that? How is it going to work out? I don't know. But we should make an effort at trying to bring together smart people across the town to lessen school choice, because that has a big, well, you know better than I do, financial impact. And then last, if we could fast forward 5 or 7 years, I'm not saying anything that anybody else hasn't said, we need to improve downtown. Downtown isn't as positive an environment as growth representing what could be a real demonstration of New England hometown. This has been talked about many different forms, many different ways. But like transportation, it just takes the will of the selectmen to say, we're going to find a way to put together all the stakeholders, put them in a room together, form what I would hope to be a public-private commission to bring everybody together, all the smart people that have various stakes in how to make downtown be a much more pleasant place to be. And like everything else, we'll find that way so that 5, 7 years from now, we'll have as beautiful a downtown as any other New England community. These things, we know that transportation and downtown redevelopment are difficult topics, but other communities have handled them. This is just a question of leadership and will to get them done.
Now, the whole idea of downtown, I mean, we grew up leaving Stacy, walking down Main Street, so we'd go to Grant's, get our little bag of popcorn every day. Everything happened right downtown in Main Street. There really wasn't. I mean, the whole idea of they're building 495, and when we grew up, it was like, why do we need that? I mean, today, God knows without it, we wouldn't be where we are, but it seems like since we were kids, both our generation and the millennials behind us, and who knows what my grandson's generation will bring, but it seems like they've moved out of the small, boutique-y. It used to be you could look and say, go downtown, you need anything to do with music, Ronnie Pagnini was there.
Right.
I mean, luckily we've got Ronnie Jr. keeping that trend. But everything was downtown. Then everybody wanted to shift. If you remember, Grant's, moved way, way near Medway, almost out of the center of the universe.
Right.
And then Kmart came in, and that was it for that. the trend doesn't seem to be to come into the old downtown areas that we grew up with. How do you bring people in? What do you do to change the paradigm where people will look forward to going downtown?
So Al, the first thing when I'm asked that very question is, I ask people, do you believe it's possible? If I showed you Ann Arbor, if I showed you Holliston or Hopkinton or other communities, and you'd see that they have nice downtowns, you first have to say, it is possible to make this happen. I think sometimes there's some people in Milford that just don't even think that it's possible. So first, we got to line up people to believe that yes, with the right leadership.
Harold, it's not possible to have a bus in Milford. That will never happen.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know,
So first, you got to make people believe. But right now, we are sitting with such two great opportunities which have never before at the same time been in front of us to make this happen. First, we have the redevelopment of the space at Middle School East. Thank goodness. Now, finally, Middle School East is going to be put on surplus, given back to the town, and the town can put it out for bid, put it back on the tax rolls, find a good developer.
I want to go over that in detail with you because it's such a big issue, but.
And equally, we have Archer Rubber. We have that wonderful.
We had Archer Rubber.
I'm talking about the Archer Rubber space. That space is now going to be beautifully suitable for redevelopment. Now we take, that's what it starts with, is available, wonderful space. Right now, we bring together good developers who have vision. The town supports them in executing their vision. We have the impetus for driving that engine of renewing downtown Milford. It would be, again, if I can just fast forward 5 years, 7 years from now, imagine a new building at the Middle School East location, more parking so people can get downtown and stay downtown, a mixed-use kind of facility, I'm not quite sure, but a place that people want to be. That drives commercial activity, that drives restaurants, that drives more people to be there. So now we turn our attention to the Archer Rubber. Little side, but it's one of those potential neat communities that could be developed as a very special place to live and shop, and separate from, but still part of downtown Milford. So right now, we've got two wonderful opportunities that heretofore have never presented ourselves. There's the driving engine. It starts with the Board of Selectmen to say, this is how we want to get it done. This is our vision. Let's find the right people who can develop these. Let's help them get them developed, and let's work with them to market them, and then the engine's been primed and we'll be more successful.
I would love to see something happen with Middle School East. The biggest issue I've always worried about is parking. Because if you sit there and think, if I want any commercial, any retail, 70,000 square feet of space, and you can have 10 people there at a time. And you better not have any employees, because there's just not been any parking.
Well, the problem with parking exists today. Even before we begin to develop that new facility, we need more parking everywhere. And without parking, people won't go to restaurants.
Well,
that's just, we just start.
You look at a couple of the restaurants downtown that are very attractive from a food, ambiance, service, and you say, I have to park in Bellingham and walk there?
This is, so as part of the redevelopment of the Middle School East, my vision says we need a garage, okay? I don't know if that's the right solution, but I will say you're absolutely correct. We need to add significant amount of parking downtown, not just for the new facility that'll be built at Middle School East, but for everything along the way. And, without a doubt, that's a leadership issue from the Board of Selectmen to find a way through planning to bring more parking to downtown Milford.
Because that, to me, when you ask people, why don't you go downtown? Traffic and parking comes up all the time.
And they're right.
You know, I can park behind Chris Moran's place. I can park down on Central Street. I've never not been able to find parking, candidly. But again, I think it's the impression
Right.
that there's no parking and it's heavy traffic. So I'll just go down the other end of town. And I laugh because I sit there and say, okay, so you're going to drive all the way almost to Medway to go to Kohl's, to go to one of the other shops way down there. I don't know that you saved any time versus going 2 minutes out of your way to park downtown.
This is what we have to develop, right? My favorite is Johnny Jack's on the weekend. Every morning, I mean, you go there on the weekend and as I'm driving, I'm thinking, am I going to be able to find a parking place?
Yep.
It's very busy. Lots of people are already parking there. And then you sort of say, well, if I just go over to Panera, there's plenty of parking there.
Right. I got that huge parking lot.
Not going to have a problem. But this is what hurts downtown. Parking is a fundamental responsibility of the town to provide its merchants. And without doing that, the merchants won't be encouraged to come and open up commercial activity.
And if they do, people won't be encouraged to go down there and support them.
Absolutely. And so this is that unique opportunity we have right now with that space to develop and also include additional parking in that space on Middle School East property. That's, as a selectman, that's the first place I would begin to look to help revitalize downtown.
So now we've been talking about a lot of issues on transportation. Obviously, probably the most radical has been the bus. And there was pretty heated discussion over, will a common bus system work in Milford? Or should we do a Milford Uber? I mean, I think I know how you came out on that since you kind of led the charge. Talk to me about the Milford bus.
Well, the first thing is, Al, and as you well know, it went through extensive review as part of the due diligence. I mean, this was not a decision that this town came to easily at all. It went through at least a year worth of review by different folks.
For $250,000, it should.
It should, as well it should. I'm just, want
Right.
to be sure that people know that, a lot of good questions were asked and a lot of things went on. In the beginning, the bus numbers certainly were not as fast a growth as what the MWRTA and others had hoped would be for the bus system. But now, by all accounts, the various constituency organizations, whether it's Milford Housing or I'll say all the social groups, I hear stories from the high school of being able to get kids from the high school to their jobs or over to the youth center, that for 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks in December, we were averaging 90 folks a day. So we are certainly trending up. And what's interesting about that to me is we are trending up with very little outreach. Right now, you only find out about the bus by either happening to see that sign or knowing somebody who has happened to use the bus or has been told about the bus. And we have this wonderful transportation advisory committee who has taken it upon themselves to make the bus increasingly well known. The folks at the library have just put forth a big request to have a bus stop in front of the library. I mean, there were, as I recall, over 150 signatures on this. So we're learning the fine-tuning of it and seeing the numbers grow. I expect this year will be, as we described it, as a successful pilot. And then next year, as we have our second round pilot, it'll be viewed
At
again.
the FinCom, when somebody brought up, well, we'll know after 90 days and we can decide. I mean, I remember I looked, I said, well, then kill the program.
Right,
Just don't even start it.
right.
Because if you really believe you can take something from ground zero to success in 90 days, you're kidding yourself.
Absolutely.
And I remember Mike Suarez, who's been keeping the FinCom pretty well up to date, And they had all these metrics, and I remember looking at Bill Buckley saying, Bill, to me there's 3 metrics, ridership, ridership, and ridership. Other than that, everything else, kind of way below, orders of magnitude less interesting. But I think the first couple months, the first month it was $40 a ride we were spending. I think in January we were down to $24 a ride, which is still expensive.
Yes.
But if you look at the trend from 40 to 24,
Right.
if it keeps going that way, I don't know that a lot of us really believed 30,000 riders and, that trend or that monthly rate. But, it doesn't have to be all of 30.
Certainly not.
And the real thing is I just saw the Special Olympics program, Jen Walsh, took a pretty strong stand with a letter to the Selectmen as to how critical, the low ridership, high impact of her group.
Yes.
That there's not that many when you compare it to 28,000 people at the center of the universe.
Right.
But the impact it has on her kids, not being able to get to jobs, it's hard enough for parents with special needs children, and then they got to work.
Right.
So if their children have to get to work, the bus seems to be working for them.
And just to put a little star next to it, ridership, 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 community. And the community needs to be considered, as we just said, as part of the equation for Special Olympics, or I'm associated with Alternatives Unlimited. This is another organization that provides training for persons with developmental disabilities, and they use the bus to get to their jobs, whether at the old Hannaford, now the Big Y, and other places. So, these are important things which will have lasting impact. We don't just see a bus ride. We see somebody getting a job. And that's an
when I
important
say
thing.
ridership, I'm not necessarily only looking at it for number of people.
Right.
Because again, as Jen described, the low number but the high impact. We've always taken care of
Yes.
Milfordians who need a little extra help. At the end of the day, I've never seen this town turn their back on $5 million for a youth center.
Right.
While other towns around us were talking about curtailing their library hours, we spent almost $1.5 million to expand it.
Right.
If you ever just looked at numbers, you could. Sue Edmonds will hate me because she'll say you can justify it on numbers. You really can't. It's a pride. It's something we're doing for the kids who come over in droves from Stacy.
Right.
And whether the numbers bear it out or not, taking care of our kids, taking care of our seniors, has a bigger impact than just you or I. Okay, lazy bum, walk.
Right.
Sorry, Harold.
That's what my doctor says.
Just walk. It's good for your health.
Right.
But, you look at somebody's grandmother, they don't have that option all the time.
And think how important the bus system is to our hospital. To our hospital, they put up $75,000. And if you were to talk to the medical staff there, they'd say people are missing less medical appointments. They're able to, parents don't have to stay home so they could take their older parents back and forth to a doctor's appointment at the hospital, or seeing a friend at the cancer center. The hospital was also a driving importance to bring in the transportation, and has well recognized the importance to our community.
A lot of people, and I was one of them, was not questioning whether we should help with transportation. Question was, will a bus route work? If you have somebody like my mom, there's no way she's going to walk 1.5 miles to get to a bus route,
Right.
to wait an hour, to go downtown, to then wait an hour, and then walk 1.5 miles to our house. Whereas a Milford Uber, more vans down to senior center saying, hey, come get me. Because my mom's taken advantage of it a couple times.
Yes.
Where she needed a ride to the doctor. So the question, Harold, to you is, have we determined which one works better yet?
Well, I think I've always thought of it as they're two different communities, right? I mean, and you know, the one community serves that larger group of people that need to move from one designated spot to another designated spot and return. As Pat Morrill has told me, there'll be days when the ladies from Birmingham Court, 12, will get on the bus and they will go down to Kohl's. And then they will eat at Panera, and they will go back to Kohl's, and they will pick up the bus, and they will go back. And they will have spent the whole day, and Pat would say, it was a wonderful day. All right, that's one audience. Now we have the other kind of audience that has a definitive, I've got to get to here kind of need. And the Senior Center has begun a good start at doing that. Do I think they need to offer more of that? Absolutely. And do I think that that also can be justified? Absolutely. It is now incumbent upon, you know, the Council on Aging and the, you know, folks at the Senior Center to come forward with a plan to show exactly what you said, that we need to provide this kind of, you know, what's called the ride, you know,
Some form
of the ride. And when they come forward with that, I'm sure that they will get a good listen to by the Board of Selectmen as well as the Finance Committee and decide how something like that might be able to be financed.
Now, a lot of what we are able to do necessitates funding.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think Milford's doing financially?
Well, you know, I think we're very fortunate. You know, the first, it begins with the culture of the folks who have, you know, long have led the town and brought to it a culture of we watch every penny. We don't watch dollars, we watch pennies. And pennies don't get spent without a good review by a lot of people over a long period of time. And that characteristic has just, it's everywhere in our town. And it is shown, I mean, I'm sure you know this much better than I do, it is shown in how we've been able to manage positive budgets over the last few years and how the stabilization funds have done quite well. And altogether financially, being in as good a position compared to other communities as one could possibly be. And, you know, and the evidence to that is the kind of interest rate we are fortunate to get when we have to do a bonding. So it has that double impact of solid means spending even less on those kinds of on those kinds of expenses, on things like that. And that's because, you know, the Finance Committee is very careful, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the selectmen are very careful with the programs it chooses to even bring forth. And the thing, now as I understand, though, you know, out of our budget, 50%, 55% is school committee monies. Maybe
60.
it's 60%.
62.
And I've even heard that if you include the other dollars,
If you include everything in, it's in the 60s.
it's in the 60%. So, you know, a lot of that money doesn't get seen by the Board of Selectmen. And so there's also that incumbent responsibility on the schools to make sure that it too is spending its money most wisely and in a way that's most effective for the community.
Two words come up a lot: 2.5 override and debt exclusion. What are your feelings?
Well, you can take both of those words out of my language. I think I couldn't even imagine a debt exclusion or 2.5% override. I mean, the thought doesn't even come into my head.
Yes,
so
I refer to it as profanity, and we don't like profanity in the town hall.
Or anywhere in this town, or anywhere. So forgive me for smiling. It just words would never even come up for discussion.
And you know, and it's funny because debt exclusion, we've got a town close to us where they finance the school through a debt exclusion, and after you get your tax bill, they hand you as a homeowner a $500 extra bill every year. I mean, for a dozen years, we kept building up the stabilization account. And people kept saying, why are you continuing to build it? We said, there's a school coming,
Right?
and Woodland is here.
Right?
And we financed it out of normal budget.
And that's how smart businesses operate. I mean, this is how smart businesses, smart towns do their business. They think to the future. It's not just what's the next big thing
Sure.
and what's the next big thing after that, and we'll leave the problems to the folks who follow us.
Well, that was the humor when somebody said, what do you do now? And I said, what do you mean? Well, why do you need a stabilization account now? I said, there's a school coming, because in 8 to 10 years, we're going to have to renovate the high school.
Right?
And we can pretend that it's not going to happen, but that school,
We know it's there.
school's been a rock since 1974 when my class graduated out of it, first one.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and you sit there and say, we really haven't done much, but we're going to have to renovate. You know, hopefully expand, put a real field house in, kind of
Yeah.
move it up to where we ought to be.
Yes.
But if, you know, again, if we start saving over 10 years,
We're in good shape. That's the recognition of today. We want to do something in the future. And fast forwarding that 10 years and saying, in 10 years, we want to have a high school that is equivalent to what we want a good high school to be. Now, knowing that today, we can prepare ourselves so that it's not a radical financial burden. And there won't be an extra $500 bill in a homeowner's, coming to a homeowner's mailbox.
another big thing coming our way, water company. What are your feelings on that?
Well, so the first thing I have to say is because of the lack of data that's been publicly available, it's hard to say anything definitive. And that's, for those of us who have not seen the details, I can only talk about it in the abstract. So,
But that's 90% of Milford. I mean, 90% of our residents are not able to look at the details.
and hopefully over time,
Well, when the details sort
come
out and you say, hey, by the way, I'd like $63 million of your money,
right.
then they get the details, I hope.
Then we should have some forms like we did before and the details. So I can talk about it in terms of, a lot of yes, but, okay?
Sure.
So the first thing is, look, nearly all communities in Massachusetts own their own water companies. And there's a good reason for that, because it is a monopoly service, and we want to be able to control the rates on the monies. Now, we all suffered through giant rates increases on water, and we've suffered through water quality issues. We all know that there are impending infrastructure improvements that need to be made, and in general, because it's a no-bid kind of situation, it's the sort of thing that a town should take on and should own. But of course, that's subject to two things. First of all, the dollar amount. Is there a dollar amount too high? Certainly, there would be a dollar amount too high to do that, to take it on.
Any dollar amount is too high when you're talking $60 million.
Well, that's my point.
yeah.
But so you can't just say, yes, we should buy it, because that's what it says at any price. No, you can't say that. So again, assuming, and I couldn't say what a fair price is, but assuming that the fair price could be worked out, then the second question is the town's capacity to operate it from day one. And that would be the second question I would look at is, and in some ways, that question is much more important to me than even the money, because the money can get assessed by smart people and be determined on what is a fair number and how it can be financed. And that's done. But the real issue begins day plus one. The water doesn't turn brown, because then the town owns it and the town has to solve it, right? We can't be saying, call the water company. We own it. So how I feel about it is I'd really need to be very convinced that day plus one, we can operate that water company Well, I'll say as efficiently as the water company is being operated now, but ideally a lot more efficiently,
Sure.
and with the capability of handling any kind of issue that might arise. So that would be fundamentally a bigger question I would have.
And I agree with you because the real essence came out. Can we operate it in a revenue neutral mode, maintaining the quality? If you can't hit those two, if the quality goes down or it's going to cost us a lot more money, then I can't see people in Milford voting for it.
And I think you put your finger on exactly what the responsibility that the Board of Selectmen have is first to prove to themselves those two things, that we can operate this at least in a revenue neutral way and at least with the same and ideally better quality. And if the Board of Selectmen can't get itself to being in that position, then it has no business of even bringing it forth. Then it has to convince itself that it can convince others within town government, and then has to convince itself that it can convince town meeting members as well as the rest of the community. And it has to be able to do that in a deliberate way that offers little doubt that yes, it can be operated revenue neutral, and yes, the quality will be there.
And someday we do hope that, as you said, the details haven't been able to come out by process, by law. They got to wait.
Right.
But if we're able to operate it, not any better, but as efficiently, well, then you're eliminating the profit. There's a reasonable profit built
Yes.
in, and there's taxes.
Yes.
So there is a bit of a wiggle room in there.
And maybe even a little bit more, because if the construction for the infrastructure is being no bid, then perhaps if we bid out the infrastructure
Maybe we can
development,
get better than
we could even,
picking ourselves.
yeah, and doing and saving some money there as well. So there are good opportunities financially to make this work.
Another area, not a trick question, immigration. Seems to be a hot issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's always hard to explain to people that even though we are the center of the universe, we really can't control immigration policies. I don't know that Tom O'Laughlin can deport people to Rhode Island. Realistically, when somebody says immigration to you, what are your thoughts?
Well, Al, what you just said is the first and foremost thought, is that immigration is a federal issue, all right? Even our governor can't do anything particularly. He can't
Deport them to Rhode Island?
deport
No.
them to Rhode Island either. And I think all of us would like to see the federal government take a much better leadership position on this topic. And, we're sort of all, in every community across our state, across the whole United States, is in this very same predicament. However, within that, there are still laws. And we have the obligation to still enforce those laws to the same effect that all of our other laws have been, are required to be enforced. And so how that affects the non-immigrant community or the immigrant community or anybody, we are a nation of laws that should have whatever laws are required to be enforced should be enforced to the same vigor.
So you don't see Milford being a sanctuary town or city or whatever?
It is, I'm no expert in this, I'll be honest, but if it is the responsibility of our local police to let the Department of Homeland Security know about someone who has violated laws, then they should. If that is their responsibility, then they should. If it's not, then it's up to the community to decide whether it should do that or not. And frankly, I don't know, where we are on that. It's just,
I just have a fundamental issue
Yeah.
with saying I'm going to select certain laws.
yeah,
Now, you want to change them? Absolutely.
absolutely,
Go exert your vote
right.
and get the laws changed. But to
Right.
sit there and say, well, I think I'm going to decide which laws
Right.
I want to follow and which ones I don't, just doesn't seem American to me.
Nope. We have laws, and they should all be enforced like any other law.
If you had the magic wand, they say, okay, Harold, you're a selectman. You get to change one thing in Milford. What would you change?
Well, I'd go back to the very first point I made, which is as fast as possible, I would make town government as transparent as possible. You know, in the years that I've been associated with town government, to become engaged, to ask somebody to be engaged with our government, to be helpful, to be caring, to be community oriented, they need to understand what's going on. Today, it's very difficult for someone who just sits down at their computer one night and over the weekend and says, well, what's going on in my hometown? And they go to their website. Well, it's not a lot there, but there's an awful lot of things going on in this town. So if I could do a magic wand, we would have a much more transparent government so that everyone could make a much better evaluation as to how its town employees, its hired workforce is doing its job. And if we're doing our good job, then that's a good thing. And if we're not, then we need different people.
And I think the selectmen led the charge where we weren't getting information out on capital improvement projects.
Yeah, there's a good example.
And it's funny because, I mean, I've always believed you can complain about anything you're willing to fix. Yes, the current chair of the selectmen looked at me and said, great, you complained about it, fix it.
Right?
And the idea was not fix the process, but okay, we have put capital planning back in the FinCom
Yes.
area. Fix the information, communication. You know, what are you going to do? And a few years ago, we started writing the report to go through every article.
Right.
And that's the warrant, the background, and since it's from the FinCom, how the FinCom discussed it.
Right.
And then, I want to say last year, 2 years ago, if town meeting members aren't aware, all of the capital projects that are being sponsored or that are approved on the warrant, I shouldn't say sponsored, that's not fair. We're now asking every person to put together a package and answer 5 basic questions. Mm-hmm. And that's being put up at least a month ahead of town meeting on the website. So, like, we just bought a TUI toy. I know he hates when I say that, but, you know, that little toy cost us $1 million. You know, and somebody said, you know, you've got 100 pages of information up on the website. I said, yes. For $1 million, Chief TUI came through and gave us all the information we need to have an educated opinion.
Right.
I'm sorry, if you're not interested, that's okay. I'm not forcing you. But I think the selectmen do need to take that kind of lead role to sit there and say, okay, guys, you said you could do it better, do it. And if I'm not doing it well enough, if there are better ways, then you got the opinion of the selectmen and say, hey, look, you should also do this.
This is transparency. Sunshine is the greatest antibiotic to poor government. And we know this, and that where there is sunshine, we get the best results, and we get the most engaged community. We get people who want to be involved because they're not afraid of asking questions and seeing what's going on or attending a meeting that they ordinarily, I don't know if I'll go. But this was a really interesting topic that's being discussed. I think I'll go to that FinCom meeting and listen to what's going on with Chief TUI or whomever or whatever. And that's a good thing, that they listen in, because that may be a future FinCom member who demonstrates their interest, which is a good thing. So, as I said, transparency first and foremost across not just town hall, across the school system, wherever money is spent, wherever people are employed, everyone in the community should have access to all the knowledge that everyone has, you know, subject to, you know, the appropriate laws,
well,
you know, whatever.
I mean, there are limitations.
There are limitations, but business of the government should be accessible to all, and it would be a good thing.
The organization of our Milford government You mentioned people have to work better together. Would you see any areas where we should change, like we did recently in the last few years, taking elected posts to appointed? Anything come to mind that you would like to see changed?
It's such an interesting question, Al. I was just talking to somebody about that, and I said, I don't see any fundamental reorganization, but what I do see is organizations working much more nicely together, okay? And that needs encouragement by the leadership to bring organizations together to make people feel that they are part of the town of Milford, not this department. And again, that's a leadership thing by the selectmen to do that. And I just pointed out a simple thing. I've been a member of the Commission on Disability, 5, 6 years. And I had pointed out to a town official that, it'd be nice if a thank you note went out to all the volunteers who give so much of their time and energy to their department. Maybe have a reception for all the wonderful people who give of their time and energy, who aren't paid, who just do it because it's the right thing to do. Making people play together, that's not the right way. Making people feel better about
We joke
working.
about playing in the sandbox together in a cooperative way.
That's what I would seek to do, is to try to, make sure everybody knows everybody in town hall. I'm not even sure that is correct. And that everybody understands that, hey, I'm doing that, you're doing that. We shouldn't both be doing that, right? And that only happens when people are led to be together, which that's not a functional or a legal change, but what it is a cultural improvement in making sure people have an understanding for each other and an appreciation for each other. That's what I would like to see, and that would be I think that would be a big deal. A year or two of that, and people would feel much better about, their work within town hall.
Capital projects. Any one in particular stick out in your mind that we should either continue, expand?
Well, there are certainly the fundamental ones for which we have no choice. And, it is what it is. Godfrey Brook is what it is. Stormwater rain is at our doorstep. There's not much we can do about it. So there are a list of capital projects for which...
But it's funny on Godfrey Brook, I don't think people really understand that the town is not liable to correct Godfrey Brook. It really is the responsibility of the landowner.
Right.
God, we'd never do that to somebody, when you walk in and say, by the way, it's going to cost you $50,000 to fix the 20 feet.
Yeah.
You could kill somebody financially.
Yes.
But, again, part of being a community, I'm pretty proud that we've never gone back to the homeowner and said, sorry, Harold, that's your brook. Mm-hmm. We all pitch in as a community.
So we agreed as a community, we're going to fix this. And it was the right decision. And it was presented that way, and we knew as a community we needed to do that. Not too much choice, at the end of the day, to doing that. So if we talk about, if the question really has to do with projects which aren't mandated,
right.
Let's go with the non-mandated one. Well, I'm keen on starting soon on the Milford High School renovation project. It's a big, long, you know better than I do how long it takes, to go from here to a newly renovated facility. And, we're talking about third graders that might get to take advantage of it, right?
Maybe.
Maybe, but that's what I mean. So.
No, realistically, we don't want to do it on our own.
No.
So by the time we get in line, et cetera, it'll be 8 years.
Yes.
And in a way, I'm kind of happy. Kevin McIntyre will hate me for saying it because it gives us time to save up some money.
Yes.
To pay off Woodland, to kind of get over some of the other projects.
Right.
But 8 to 10 years, is probably the time frame. So it's probably not the third graders, but the kindergartners.
Right? I
That'll-
like to say third graders because I'm an optimistic kind of guy, but you're probably right that maybe they haven't even entered school yet. That time is now to begin to think about it, not to spend money,
Nope.
but to begin to put the plans in place, because if we wait 5 years to start, then it's 5 more years before we get to it, and these aren't babies that have even been born yet. So so mine is a community-wide effort to begin to determine how best to handle our senior high school activities. And that way, we're saving the money, we're doing good planning along the way, so that when we do come forth with a plan to spend money, we've got the most state resources possible, we've got whatever foundation money we might be able to find along the way, and the ability then to execute on it in the same good way we executed on Woodland, right? I mean,
Yep. Harold, I have one question. I'm from Milford. Why should I vote for you?
Well, I'll give you 3 or 4 good reasons, I hope. The first is, Al, there's no learning curve with me. I've sat in selectmen meetings for 3 years, just watching what they do. Occasionally participating, but mostly just sitting there watching what they do. I have a short learning curve to being what I hope is an effective town selectman. The second is I think most people know me to be diligent. That when I put my mind to something, I'm not easily dissuaded from following it through for as long as it's appropriate to follow it through. I don't do things lightly. I am known to be a very serious person that takes things that are important to the community and doing the best I can with it. And finally, I've got the bandwidth. I'm not involved in any other committees. I don't have any other responsibilities. I plan to be as much of a full-time selectman as I possibly can. I'm not accepting any donations, gifts, or to the campaign. I'm not even going to accept a stipend from the town to be a selectman. Full-time bandwidth, diligence, short learning curve. I hope that those are good reasons for people to vote.
And the one thing I will say to wrap up, my hat's off to you and the other candidates for being ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this is still Milford. And history shows that if you go down the dark side, people don't seem to respond very well.
No.
So up till now, what I've seen is ladies and gentlemen,
Thank you.
bringing out your merits and not picking on other people, and I hope it continues.
Me too.
And as always, the 6 loyal viewers will know I've never asked you to vote for any candidate. I've asked you to become educated, but get out, and I've begged you, please vote. Come April 4th, you'll have a number of forums, a number of candidate nights, shows like this one. Watch a few minutes and get to know who you want to represent you. Good night, may God bless, and may tomorrow be a better night than